In this episode of the podcast, we're going to be talking about binge eating. Now, it's really important for me to upfront tell you what I mean when I say binge eating, because this specific term can conjure up certain feelings, emotions amongst some people, and it also can mean very, very different things if we don't clarify actually what the definition of binge eating as it pertains to this particular podcast. So what I'm referring to over the course of the next few minutes is nothing related to an eating disorder. That's not for me to be even commenting on. That is for an eating disorder professional to discuss with someone who may be suffering from those binge eating disorders, which are defined as that eating disorder that needs some sort of outside support, because they are not really nutritional issues. They're more psychological issues that need to be resolved by an appropriate professional. However, many people these days label kind of overeating and episodes where you'll probably eat a packet of biscuits or something like that as binging, as binge eating. You could argue that that's not technically binge eating. Maybe it has some disordered eating behavior patterns about it, but I wouldn't go as far as say it's a clinical eating disorder. So that's a clear distinction I want to make right up front with this episode of the podcast. I am not talking about eating disorders. I'm talking about the people who feel like they maybe one evening during the week or something like that, they have a taste of ice cream or a bit of pizza. They plan to have one slice of that pizza, but they end up having the whole entire pie. Maybe they pile on some ice cream after that as well, and they feel guilty and a bit of shame about that whole process. These are the people that I'm trying to reach with this episode of the podcast, and the 6 things that I've got for you in terms of trying to combat that binge eating behavior. So let's talk about that right now. Let's dive into binge eating as I've defined it right now, and how we can kind of try to combat that. So formalities out of the way, let's get stuck into our 6 tips. The first of which is eat more regularly. Yes, meal frequency doesn't matter that much for fat loss, but it can be important when you're trying to manage your hunger, particularly when you have issues regulating it. So when we're in these binge eating patterns, it might be the case that you're getting excessively hungry and then you're trying to put that off and put that off and put that off, and it's not necessarily working for you. Maybe you're trying fasting, you're skipping meals, you're trying to save calories for later in the day. Those things are valid. Those approaches are great. They work for some people, but the key thing is, and if you've heard any of my podcasts before, you'll be hearing me say that do what works for you in some of these cases. Obviously, things like energy balance and so on and so forth, they matter for everybody. But in terms of the method that you pick, it really is what works for you. So let's say that Susan at work, she's doing fasting, she's skipping breakfast, and it's really working for her. But for you, you try that, and you're excessively hungry, and then when you do come to eat, you find it difficult to control your hunger, you difficult to control how much calories you have, the portion sizes, things like that. You just find that incredibly difficult. So why punish yourself even more? Why create this kind of environment where binge eating might take place? Why not nip that in the bud? Maybe you want to do the complete opposite. Maybe you want to eat more regularly, maybe every 3 hours, so it prevents you from feeling constantly hungry. You always know that there's a meal coming around very, very soon, so it might help you to kind of manage those feelings and those cravings and those waves of feelings they hit you. You can kind of say, yeah, you know what, cravings, you can just fuck off for a second, because you know what, I've got a meal coming up in about an hour and a half and that's going to be fine. And therefore that might be a very, very valid way for you to manage that hunger when you feel like skipping meals is not really working for you. The second point is eat to feelings of fullness. Now, before you sit down and eat, rate your hunger on a scale of 1 to 10. Like, how hungry are you right now? You may have planned to say, lunchtime is at 12, 12:30, whatever it may be. So you've planned to eat, but maybe you're not eating because you are actually hungry. Sometimes that's a good thing. Again, we're trying to maybe keep hunger at bay. So don't necessarily wait until you're absolutely ravenous. But at that point, judge how hungry actually are you. If you had to sit down and think about it, where would you put that rating? Are you a 7? Are you an 8? Are you actually like a 4 or a 5? Kind of like not actually that hungry. And if you're not particularly hungry, like you're down on that scale, well, how might that affect the food that you put on your plate, how much of it you actually kind of pile up, and also how much you end up deciding to eat? If you know in the back of your mind that you're not actually that hungry, then maybe when you're mindfully eating, you're mindfully consuming your food and not just doing it blindly and mindlessly and kind of distracted by other things and just shoveling stuff into your face, well, maybe that makes you consciously think about, you know what, I'm not actually that hungry. So A, I'm not going to put too much on my plate. And B, I'm going to be conscious of my feelings of fullness so that I can stop whenever I feel maybe a 7 or 8 out of 10 on the fullness scale. So these kind of thought processes, these conscious, really thinking about what it is you're doing with food can really help you when it comes to managing those feelings of, you don't get to that binge eating kind of point, because even when, let's say for example, even when you're in that moment that you define as a binge where you're having pizza and things like that, it's never too late to back out of that process, because you might feel, okay, now I'm balls deep in, or ovaries deep in my pizza and I've committed to it now. I'm halfway through it, so I might as well finish the fucking thing. You can actually back out of that. Half the pizza is not as calorific as a whole pizza. So maybe you only planned to have a slice, but you had half. Well, there's no reason to kind of keep sabotaging if you know at that point maybe, okay, actually I could back out of this now. I'm not actually hungry. I'm actually sick of the taste of this pizza now. I've had my cheesy fill. Let's back out of this. You can always do that, especially if you're mindful about what you're doing. The third point, and that's a really crucial one, is stop dieting. It might seem super obvious, but if you're struggling to regulate feelings of hunger and to stop binge eating, well, maybe you shouldn't be dieting. Maybe you'd be better working on your relationship with food without the added pressure of being on a restricted amount of calories. Maybe for you, the better thing is to go up to maintenance calories where you've got a little bit more calories to play with. That allows you a bit of more food freedom. It allows you a bit more broad range of food choices. It allows you to have more, let's say, calorific, indulgent food, whatever you want to label it. And maybe at that point you can start to work on, well, actually, there are no good and bad foods. Let's work on that. Let's really believe that. Let's kind of incorporate some of what you think is bad into your diet and prove to yourself that actually it doesn't make you fat to have a donut, a slice of pizza, or whatever. Maybe it's an opportunity for you to practice some of that mindful eating so that you can be in control. Again, you're doing it in a more relaxed environment. You're not having the added pressure of a calorie deficit, of trying to diet, of putting pressure on yourself in terms of scale weight. Scale weight isn't everything, but it's easy for me to say don't focus on the scale weight when I know that you'll be stepping on that scales and you'll be disappointed if it doesn't go down. But if that's not even in your goal, that's not even in your thought process, well, you can do these sorts of behavior changes, these habit changes, without the pressure of trying to diet at the same time, especially if you're trying to cram it all into 8 weeks or 12 weeks or things like that. So think about these things. Think about the fact that if you do eat any type of food, you're not a bad human for doing it. We all eat various different things that, not even the cleanest of clean eaters is someone who escapes having a donut or a little sugary treat or something like that. These aren't bad things. These aren't moral decisions. And sometimes it's easier to go through that process of habit change without going into a diet first. So that would be the thing that I would start to think about. The fourth point really kind of leads on from that, and that is to practice mindful eating. Now, mindful eating is more difficult than it sounds. I mean, how many times do you actually eat without any distractions? I mean, no phone, no TV, no reading, no nothing. How many times you just sit and then maybe with a little bit of conversation or something like that and actually just eat and savor the flavor of what you eat and pay attention to when sort of that taste sensation starts to dissipate. Many people these days call themselves foodies. I love food. I'm such a foodie. Yet do those people really appreciate what they eat? Do they just stuff food in and think, oh, this tastes nice and blah, 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 blah? But do they actually pay attention to what they're eating? Do they actually enjoy it? Or are they just shoveling food into their face while scrolling through Instagram and things like this? Now, you're not a bad person if you do that. I'm just saying is that maybe you could eat more mindfully. And we all like food. That's how we kind of exist, right? Everybody likes food, and it's one of these things that is part of our culture, it's part of our society that, whether you go to a birthday or wedding, an anniversary, a bar mitzvah, or maybe Judy had a poo at work, there's some sort of food or celebration that goes with all of these different sorts of events. So we all need to kind of figure out how we're going to manage these things whilst also achieving our goals. It's very unrealistic for the vast majority of people to just put an outright ban on anything that's not considered clean. This isn't living in the real world. And practicing mindful eating can teach you, again, it's about hunger scale, it's about the taste scale as well, and it's about fullness. So understanding that, okay, how hungry am I? Like I mentioned before, how hungry am I before I go into that particular meal? How full do I feel partway through that meal? Am I getting to that point where, I am feeling a little bit stuffed? Okay, is that the signal for me to now stop eating? Am I actually full? And also when we talk about taste sensation, well, we see the taste of a particular food actually drop off after the third or fourth bite. It might be the case, therefore, that you just keep eating certain foods a little bit mindlessly. Again, engaging in that mindful eating practice is really, really beneficial. And I would highly recommend you go and get yourself a copy of The Joy of Half a Cookie. That book is all about mindful eating. First half of the book teaches about the concepts. Second half of the book is the actual practical application. So I'd highly recommend that you dive into that book and start to genuinely really put those things into practice. Again, linking back to number 3, it might be a good point then to stop dieting while you work through that. Okay, you might not be achieving your goals in the time frame in which you dreamed and hoped for, but actually adopting mindful eating practices now might save you a lot of pain in the future, and it also could prevent you yo-yo dieting. It could make you enjoy the process of dieting a little bit more, and therefore just make it a little bit more smooth sailing. Number 5, be kind to yourself. I did a podcast a few days ago about the science of self-compassion, and it works. Revisit that podcast and start being kind to yourself when these instances of overeating occur. You're not a bad person. There's no need to feel guilt. There's no need to feel shame. The more that you pile on these negative feelings onto yourself, well, you're going to create this cycle of negativity that has you spiraling downwards into feelings of self-loathing and not really putting you in the frame of mind to actually put these things behind you and move forward. Maybe it's a case that you want to take it as a learning point. What did this tell you about the way that you're dieting? Did it tell you that the restrictive process that you're going through now is not working? Is it telling you that trying to skip meals is not working? Is banning alcohol not working for you? What is it that you are learning from each time that you quote unquote go off track? And how can you approach things differently? Rather than sit there and wallow and say, I'm crap at this, I shouldn't have done this, I'm a bad person, or I can't ever diet, I'll never lose the weight. Instead of reinforcing these things, say, right, okay, the only way that I go backwards is if I give up. If I keep trying to learn, keep trying to move forward, yes, sometimes it might feel like a couple of steps backwards, but I'm always trying to push forward, and I will eventually get there if I choose to take these things as learning experiences. So that's number 5. Number 6, relax. Chill the fuck out. Might be your thing, might be meditation. Meditation, I've tried it personally, it doesn't always work for me. I find having moments of just deep breathing works for me. Whether you call that meditation, that's up to you. But in terms of meditation, I've never really found it is something that works for me personally. Again, maybe I'm just doing it wrong. I don't know. I find my relaxation in reading a book. That's my thing. That's my meditation. Or maybe listening to some raging heavy metal. That's also good meditation for me. Whatever it is for you, maybe a bubble bath, maybe some vigorous self-pleasuring, I don't know. Whatever it is, the thing that helps you relax, do that. Obviously, maybe if you're self-pleasuring, maybe there's a limit to how much you can do, but there you go. Find ways to de-stress, find ways to unwind and incorporate that. Make time for that. Make time for yourself within your own routine, because trust me, that starts to work. If you start to be able to come at things from a point of view is where you feel energized, you feel relaxed, well, you're going to be able to give your best to all of these various different situations. You're going to be able to think with a clearer mind and make more rational decisions. So they are my 6 ways to help you reduce those binge eating episodes, and I hope you found them useful.